Chapter 548. Please come this way. I will guide you. Ydir turned his gaze toward the chief attendant he had met once again. The weight reflected in his expression was entirely different than before. The old man, although aged, maintained an upright posture. He bowed courteously and briefly scanned the faces of the two people who had alighted from the carriage behind Ydir. The order to bring suitable personnel from the cavalry for palace security had come just last night. There was a clear reason for this unexpected command. The emperor's side had determined that details of the recent events occurring within the Sun Palace had likely leaked to the outside world. Despite his caution, Ydir felt anew how difficult it was to move securely. He discussed this with Kishir and they decided to add 2 more allies to their circle. Given the situation, it's natural to include Kana, who can read information. Gakane can perfectly balance both combat and tracking while effectively protecting Kana, so he should also be included. Kana's ability was indispensable, particularly in a situation like this. However, she had the drawback of being weak in combat and unable to move quickly. Gakane's shadow clone, which had an advantage in the darkness of night, compensated for these weaknesses, enabling them to move optimally under any circumstances. Both were cautious by nature and also among Ydir's closest comrades. He had decided that today, when he needed to bring the smallest group possible, there were no better candidates. Subsequently, Kishir headed for the palace alone, while Ydir, under the guise of a secret mission to assist in palace security, called for Kana and Gakane. They rode the carriage at a later hour, taking extra precautions to prevent any information leaks. As Ydir had anticipated, both refrained from asking questions beyond what was to happen here and silently followed him. Their eyes blinked in tense alertness, clearly sensing that the atmosphere in the palace was unusual, but they weren't so unnerved as to be unable to carry out their mission. They have certainly become much calmer with experience. Both had increased remarkably in composure and cool-headedness since their entrance tests, which proved their training and missions had not been in vain. Their path was quieter than ever before, yet Ydir keenly sensed that the number of hidden guards throughout the palace had multiplied several times. Kana and Gakane might not sense this yet, but given them a few years and they will be fully capable of it. Not even considering the possibility they couldn't, he thought that if they couldn't, then he would simply train them until they could. In this state, pondering future training plans, they walked for some time until the chief attendant stopped and turned around. Both of you are responsible for monitoring all who pass from here. No visitor can go the right way without passing this point. Subdue them immediately if you find anyone suspicious. Now, Baron Ale, this way please. Ydir slightly turned his head toward Kana and Gakane. With tense faces, they cautiously nodded their acknowledgement. You both have different duties from us, right? Do well, Ydir. Nothing seems odd here so far. If anything does, I will act according to what I have been told. Then Ydir can complete the mission and we can catch up later. Alright. The place Ydir headed to after distancing from the two was Emperor Kelusa's office, a place he had visited for the 3rd time. Ydir looked up at the towering figure waiting before the closed office doors. Kishir, who had reached the Sun Palace ahead of Ydir, squinted his eyes and smiled at him. You timed it well. I have been waiting. Why are you waiting out here instead of inside? It's because of the conditions we conveyed in advance. His Majesty agreed, but I figured seeing my face might disturb his peace even before we begin the treatment. So I thought it best to wait out here. Conditions. Ydir, already aware of what they were, glanced at the door and nodded his understanding. The chief attendant, who had guided Ydir thus far, sighed softly, looking at the effervescent Kishir. You may not know how much His Majesty has been worrying about these conditions. I heard you went through great lengths to persuade him. Thank you, Yulliver. Kishir responded in a light tone, graced by a smile. If everything concludes successfully, you will find that your efforts were not in vain. I promise. You really never change. Never change? Do you know how much I have changed? Saying that will make my assistant feel slighted. ... Unaware of what could have slighted him, Yudhin maintained a reserved silence. Fortunately, the chief attendant did not extend the conversation further and opened the door. Within the office, now familiar on his third visit, were Emperor Kalusa and one other person already seated. You have finally arrived. A person not initially scheduled to be there that day, the Empress greeted them with a faint smile because of Kishir's request. Empress Rosa Faria Laor. She was the last condition that Kishir and Yudhir had prepared. Yudhir remembered the serious conversation he had with Kishir the day after concluding that the subject's will and wishes could affect the awakening conditions. I have thought about it. No matter how well we prepare, the extent to which we can elevate His Majesty's wishes has its limits. If we want more than what we have now, that's true. But isn't the point to offer something that will make His Majesty desperately want to live through the power of the awakening? Is there another way? We should call for the Empress. Pardon? Instead of living in the same palace but never seeing each other, they should be together from the start. That would certainly sway the Emperor's emotions significantly in one direction or another. But whether the Emperor's feelings would align with their hopes upon seeing the Empress was uncertain. To that concern, Kishir only offered a secretive smile. I thought about that all night. There is a way. What that way was, Yudhir only understood upon seeing the Empress. Dressed in soft-colored attire, the Empress had let her hair down, not appearing as the dignified noble woman she usually was, but rather than an untainted, refreshing young lady. No, she doesn't just look like a young lady. She's actually wearing the kind of dress that unmarried noble young women wear. The Empress, who had undergone a complete transformation, seemed slightly uncomfortable in her new attire, yet she did not lose her poise. Her eyes were filled with unwavering hope, as if she could achieve anything for the success of the day ahead. Beside her, Emperor Kalusa quietly observed her without uttering a word. Even as Kishir and Yudhir entered the scene, the Emperor barely shifted his gaze. His eyes seemed half entranced by something, while the other half were sunk in complex emotions. Do you think this attire suits what the Duke conveyed? I don't know why, but he insisted my presence here would contribute to today's event. The Empress immediately inquired upon receiving the greeting, to which Kishir confidently nodded. Yes, it's perfect. Anyone who lays eyes on your Majesty today will understand what the beauty of dawn that dispels darkness is. Duke, I didn't invite you here just to hear such words. The Emperor finally turned his head and curtly cut off his brother. To be honest, I have no clue how this situation contributes to healing. It would be difficult to accept any further action from the Empress. Please set aside such concerns. Her Majesty only needs to observe the situation freely by our side as things progress. What exactly? The Emperor seemed puzzled, sighed, and rubbed his eyes. A long sigh flowed through his parched lips. Is there anything else needed or prepared? No, everything is ready. Good, then let us begin without delay. The Emperor rose from his seat with composure. The atmosphere, which had been somewhat relaxed, instantly became ordered and everyone moved smoothly. The Emperor lay down on the meticulously arranged bed prepared for today, and Yudhir stood with Kishir at opposite sides of the bed. Near the head of the table was a servant with a bowl of hot steaming water and a wet towel, and a little further away stood the Empress, watching over all of it alone. A seemingly insignificant bedroom for an operation intended to save the life of the Emperor who ruled the empire. Only 4 people were present for the Emperor. However, Yudhir felt no sense of inadequacy. Lifting his gaze and taking a deep breath, he met the swirling crimson eyes also looking at him. Beneath that seemingly carefree smile, only Yudhir could feel the deep, age-old agonies that rippled like an endless sea. I will succeed. Strengthening his resolve, Yudhir finally removed his gloves with force. Let us begin. Underneath his pale hand, where the crimson veins writhed as if alive, the wind began to blow.